Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into a really crucial topic, how we can use the science of expertise to make clinical training much better.
hmm
Specifically when it comes to suicide assessment and intervention. It's something, we all recognize is incredibly important.
Absolutely.
And you're probably looking for a way to understand it deeply without getting, well, lost in the weeds of complex research. That's
Yeah.
exactly what we're aiming for today.
Right. And we're focusing on a really insightful piece of work, Jonah Rosenberg's 1997 paper, Expertise, Research, and Clinical Practice, a suicide assessment and intervention training model.
And what really grabbed me about this research is the core idea. How can we take what cognitive psychologists know about how experts develop their skills and directly apply that to training clinicians in this high-stakes area of helping individuals at risk of suicide? Our mission here is to pull out those key insights, those aha moments about learning and skill development and show you why they're so relevant and practical.
Okay, so to start, let's unpack a fundamental challenge the paper addresses. What does it even mean to be an expert in clinical practice?
Right.
Traditionally, research on expertise has looked at, clear-cut differences between novices and experts.
Like comparing a beginner learning chess to a grandmaster, the difference is obvious. But in clinical work, it's not always that straightforward, is it?
No, exactly.
How do you definitively say this clinician is an expert and this one isn't?
Exactly. The paper points out that clinical problems are often considered ill-structured. There's rarely a single, perfectly right answer or a neat, defined solution.
Hmm.
It's much more about navigating complexity and uncertainty. Plus, how do you objectively measure something like expert clinical judgment? It can feel, well, pretty subjective.
It's like trying to define the perfect painting.
Yeah.
I might have a strong feeling about it, but breaking down exactly what makes it masterful is tough. But here's where it gets really interesting for our focus today. The research suggests that suicide assessment might be a bit of an exception.
Yes, Lichtenberg, drawing on Schneidman's observations, proposed that assessing suicide risk is actually a more well-structured problem.
Oh, okay. How so?
Well, Schneidman's finding that a large percentage of individuals who die by suicide communicate their intentions beforehand.
Right.
That gives us more concrete signals to focus on in training.
That's a powerful point. If people often give some indication of their distress, then training clinicians to effectively recognize and respond to those signals becomes absolutely vital.
It really does.
Especially when you consider that, as the paper mentions, a significant number of psychologists in training will encounter clients who are experiencing suicidal thoughts.
It really highlights the importance of providing effective training. And that leads us to the central question the paper tackles. How can we bridge the gap between what cognitive psychology tells us about how people become experts and the practical world of clinical training?
Right. The core idea is that we can make training much more impactful by using what we know about how people learn and develop expertise. This involves understanding that there are different kinds of knowledge involved in becoming skilled.
Precisely. The paper introduces the crucial distinction between declarative and procedural knowledge.
Okay.
Declarative knowledge is the knowing what the facts, the concepts, the theories, the understanding of why things are the way they are.
So that would be like learning about the different risk factors for suicide or understanding the diagnostic criteria for depression, the foundational information a clinician needs.
Exactly. And then we have procedural knowledge, which is the knowing how.
Oh.
This encompasses the skills, the if-then rules, the understanding of how and when to apply that declarative knowledge in real-world situations. Think of it as the actual steps you take when conducting an assessment or choosing an intervention.
So understanding what empathy is that's declarative is different from actually demonstrating empathic listening skills with a client who's in distress. That's procedural.
That's a perfect way to put it. And the research emphasizes that true expertise is built largely on extensive procedural knowledge. With lots of practice, these how-to skills become more automated, more intuitive, almost unconscious.
Like a seasoned driver who doesn't consciously think about every gear shift or turn signal, they just do it.
Exactly.
So the big challenge then is, how do we help trainees move beyond just knowing about suicide risk to actually knowing how to effectively assess and intervene in those critical moments?
And that's where the idea of transforming declarative knowledge into procedural knowledge becomes central. The paper emphasizes that this transformation happens through active practice, receiving meaningful feedback on that practice, and engaging in thoughtful self-reflection. Erickson and Lehman's work really highlights the importance of this continuous monitoring and adjustment in the learning process.
Which makes perfect sense. You can read all the books on swimming, but you won't actually become a swimmer until you get in the pool and start practicing those strokes.
Exactly. And to really accelerate this learning in clinical training, the paper highlights a powerful technique called cognitive task analysis.
Okay, let's unpack that. What exactly does cognitive task analysis involve?
Think of it as a detailed breakdown of a task into its smallest parts, looking at both the visible actions someone takes and the hidden mental processes they're using. The goal is to really understand what an expert clinician is doing, both consciously and unconsciously, when they're effectively assessing and responding to suicide risk.
So getting inside their head, basically.
Pretty much, yeah. It's about getting inside their head, so to speak.
So it's like taking apart expert performance piece by piece to figure out the underlying recipe for success. And the potential benefit is huge, right? The paper suggests that using cognitive task analysis could condense years of on-the-job learning into a much more focused period of training.
That's the exciting prospect. Researchers like Means and Gott have suggested that potentially 5 years of experience could be distilled into around 50 hours of targeted training. By really focusing on the core knowledge and skills that differentiate experts. Think about that significantly shortening the learning curve for such critical skills.
That would be a real game changer in getting well-prepared clinicians into the field faster. And the paper also stresses the importance of sequencing the training in a way that aligns with the novice learner's current skill level.
Absolutely. Trainees need to build a solid foundation. While they might already have some valuable skills from other areas, like being able to gather information or show empathy, they haven't yet developed the specific ability to recognize patterns and interpret clinical information related to suicide risk. So the training needs to be structured to support that gradual development.
This all leads us to the heart of the paper, Rosenberg's Suicidality Training and Assessment of Risk Model, or RSTARM.
RSTARM, yeah.
This isn't just abstract theory, it's a concrete, practical example of how to apply these cognitive psychology principles to a very specific and critical area of clinical training.
Exactly. RSTARM is presented as a training model that is intentionally designed based on these principles of cognitive psychology and structured in a way that reflects how expertise develops. It's a deliberate move beyond some earlier training approaches that focused more broadly on general counseling techniques.
Yeah, the paper specifically contrasts RSTARM with programs like those developed by Kharkov or Ivy and Gluckstern, which were valuable for teaching foundational skills like empathy and active listening, but perhaps didn't go far enough in equipping clinicians with the higher-level strategic thinking needed for complex and high-stakes situations like suicide assessment.
That's the key distinction. RSTARM aims to address the need for training in those more advanced strategic skills, including how to manage a case over time, the critical element of when to intervene in specific ways, and the overall appropriateness of different responses.
How does it do that?
It achieves this by explicitly teaching both the declarative knowledge, the what, and the procedural knowledge, the how.
Okay, so let's really dive into the key stages and cognitive principles that make up RSTARM. The first stage is all about understanding where the trainees are starting, determining their current level of expertise.
Precisely. The trainer needs to assess the existing knowledge and practical experience of the individuals being trained. For example, with students in a master's level practicum, it's reasonable to assume they've already received some basic instruction in listening skills and professional ethics.
And the paper suggests a really practical way to gauge this, having each trainee introduce themselves and briefly share any relevant academic or clinical background they have related to depression or suicide.
What's so insightful about this simple exercise is that it accomplishes several important things at once. It gives the trainer a baseline understanding of the group's knowledge. It helps to normalize the anxiety that often surrounds the topic of suicide, and it fosters a sense of shared experience among the trainees.
Yeah.
The idea of universality, as described by Yalom, is really relevant here. Trainees realize they're not alone in their concerns or lack of experience.
Absolutely. And making the training feel personally relevant right from the start seems crucial for engagement. The paper even mentions the possibility of asking trainees, maybe by a show of hands, if they've ever personally experienced suicidal thoughts or know someone who has.
Right.
That can immediately increase their investment in the topic.
It does. When the subject matter connects to their own lives or experiences, The perceived value of the training increases, which in turn boosts their motivation to learn and participate.
Makes sense.
And as the author points out, in many training settings, the majority of trainees might be at a fairly similar level of initial expertise in this specific area, making group instruction particularly effective.
Okay, so after assessing the starting point, the next key stage in RSTARM is clearly defining the learning objectives for the training right from the beginning.
Yes, providing a clear and concise statement of what the trainees will be able to do by the end of the training, for example, accurately assess suicide risk, and identify appropriate intervention strategies, including knowing when hospitalization might be the necessary course of action.
Right.
This helps to activate their existing knowledge and makes the new information they receive more readily understandable and usable. Anderson's work highlights how a clear goal makes new information more accessible and easier to integrate.
It's like giving them a mental roadmap for the training, and connecting it to what they already know helps the new information stick better. Plus, it helps trainees understand the level of effort that will be required of them.
Yeah.
And the paper makes a great point that the topic of suicide itself often creates a natural sense of value and urgency for learners anyway.
Following the clear objectives is providing a strong rationale and perspective for why this training is so important. Why should they, as future clinicians, invest their time and energy in mastering these skills?
The rationale could include highlighting the high probability of encountering clients experiencing suicidal thoughts throughout their careers,
Which is very high.
the understandable anxiety that these situations can evoke for clinicians, and the significant legal and ethical responsibilities involved in working with at-risk individuals. Underscoring these points really emphasizes the critical importance of mastering these skills and naturally increases learner engagement.
And providing a broader perspective helps trainees connect this new knowledge with their existing understanding of mental health. It bridges the gap between their earlier learning, such as basic empathy skills, and new general information, for instance. The well-established finding that directly asking a client about suicide does not increase their risk.
That's a really important one to address up front.
Definitely. It also incorporates specific details, like the differing rates of suicide attempts and completions between genders and the varying lethality of different methods, gives context.
This leads directly to the principle of training in the same sequence as actual clinical application, essentially mirroring how they will actually use this information in their practice, starting with the initial client intake.
Exactly. The paper emphasizes that the training should logically follow the natural progression of a clinical encounter. So, the very first step is learning how to conduct a comprehensive initial intake, gathering all the relevant background information and details about the client's current presenting concerns.
Right, the groundwork.
Even if a therapist is working with a client they've seen for some time who suddenly presents with suicidal ideation, this systematic approach ensures that no crucial information is overlooked.
And within that initial intake, a critical component is a thorough assessment for symptoms of depression, often referred to as the review of systems.
What's particularly useful here is the introduction of a memory aid, a mnemonic, to help trainees recall the key neurovegetative symptoms of depression.
Why?
The paper highlights the widely used acronym SIG-E-CAPS.
Yes, I remember that one. That's for sleep, interest, guilt, energy, concentration, appetite, psychomotor retardation, and, crucially, suicidal ideation. It's such a practical tool for helping clinicians remember a critical cluster of symptoms that are often associated with increased suicide risk.
Absolutely. And the paper reinforces the sobering statistic that the vast majority of individuals who complete suicide had a diagnosable psychiatric illness at the time, with approximately half experiencing clinical depression.
Wow. That really underscores the vital importance of a thorough assessment of depressive symptoms as part of any suicide risk evaluation.
It does, and it naturally brings us back to that crucial point we touched on earlier, directly asking the client about suicidal ideation.
Right. The fear novices often have.
The paper explicitly addresses the common fear among novice clinicians that inquiring about suicide might somehow plant the idea in someone's mind.
And it powerfully dispels that myth, explaining that, in reality, asking directly about suicidal thoughts usually has the opposite effect.
Yeah.
It can actually alleviate anxiety for the client and give them permission to openly discuss something they may have been hesitant to bring up otherwise.
This is a perfect example of teaching procedural knowledge, how to ask about suicide, by first providing the declarative knowledge why it's important and not harmful.
Okay, so once a client acknowledges experiencing suicidal ideation, The training then shifts to teaching specific problem-solving procedures for conducting a more in-depth assessment of that suicidality.
Right. And the paper introduces another very helpful mnemonic here, TIPM.
TIPM, thoughts, intent, plans, and means. It's a structured framework to guide the clinician's detailed inquiry. Let's break down each of these components. First, thoughts. What specific thoughts about suicide is the client experiencing?
In this area, the training emphasizes the need to explore the onset, how long the thoughts have lasted, how often they occur, and how intense they are.
Good.
It's also important to differentiate between active suicidal ideation, where the person is actively thinking about ways to end their life, and passive ideation, such as simply wishing they were dead or wouldn't wake up.
Got it. Then comes intent, directly and clearly asking the client that they currently intend to act on their suicidal thoughts and harm themselves.
This is a critical decision point in the assessment. A no answer might suggest a lower immediate risk, but as the paper wisely advises, the assessment should definitely continue.
Right, don't stop there.
A yes answer, of course, significantly raises the level of concern and guides the immediate treatment options. The training also addresses the important nuance that clients might report having suicidal thoughts but deny any intent to act on them, sometimes citing protective factors like family or religious beliefs.
Yeah.
However, even with the denial of intent, further careful exploration is still essential. You can't just take it at face value necessarily.
Next in the TIPM framework is plans. Does the client have a specific plan for how they would attempt suicide?
The level of detail and specificity of the plan is a crucial indicator of risk. A vague thought about suicide is very different from a concrete plan that includes a specific method, time, and location.
Much higher risk.
Definitely. The paper also acknowledges the challenging reality that some clients may deny having a plan even if one exists, highlighting the ongoing need for careful clinical judgment and observation.
That's tough.
And it serves as a sobering reminder that a determined individual may still attempt suicide despite our best intervention efforts.
Finally, the M in TIPM stands for means. Does the client have access to the method they've been thinking about or planning to use?
Assessing access to means is absolutely vital in evaluating immediate risk. Someone who has suicidal intent, a detailed plan, and ready access to the means to carry it out is at a significantly higher level of risk.
Makes sense.
The paper provides a key piece of procedural knowledge here. Methods considered more lethal, such as firearms or hanging, generally carry a higher risk of completion compared to methods like medication overdose.
Okay, so beyond the immediate assessment of thoughts, intent, plans, means, the TIPM, the training also covers the broader context by addressing the assessment of various risk factors.
Yes, and the paper provides a comprehensive list of examples drawing on important research in the field. These include factors such as clinical depression, substance use disorders, a history of prior suicide attempts, a family history of suicide,
Lots of things to consider.
sexual minority status, the experience of parental death before the age of 12, being single, divorced, or widowed, gender, with that important distinction that while women attempt suicide more often, men are more likely to die by suicide, often due to the methods used.
Right, the lethality difference.
Ethnicity, with higher rates observed among white individuals in some studies, recent significant losses, financial difficulties, unemployment, chronic physical illness or disability, a lack of social support.
Wow, it's a long list.
The presence of disturbed thought processes like psychosis, the lethality of the reported plans and means, a lack of future plans or hope, and even behaviors like giving away valued possessions.
It's a really wide range of factors that can contribute to an increased risk of suicide, underscoring the complexity of the issue.
Yeah.
And then the training naturally progresses to the crucial topic of interventions for preventing suicide.
Right. And the paper acknowledges the anxiety that clinicians often experience when faced with a suicidal client.
Sure, it's intense.
And the resulting tendency to focus primarily on action-based interventions, the concrete steps taken to manage the immediate crisis. However, it also strongly emphasizes the equally important role of effectively based interventions.
Okay, so action-based interventions would include things like developing verbal or written no-suicide agreements or safety plans with the client.
With clear plans for monitoring and reaching out if urges increase, yeah.
Encouraging safe outlets for emotional expression like journaling or creative arts, contacting supportive family members or friends, arranging for overnight stays with support systems, providing crisis hotline numbers, increasing the frequency of therapy sessions,
Right.
and, when necessary to ensure safety, recommending or arranging for hospitalization.
Exactly. Those are the concrete doing things. But effectively based interventions focus more on addressing the client's underlying thoughts and feelings.
Like what?
Examples include acknowledging the client's courage in seeking help, reframing inward-directed anger as self-destructive, and suggesting healthier ways to express anger outwardly. And exploring the client's ambivalence about living versus dying by focusing on their underlying desire to end their pain rather than their life itself.
That's a powerful distinction.
It is. The paper emphasizes that often the most effective approach involves a thoughtful combination of both action-based and effectively based interventions. It even refers the reader to a specific table in the original paper as a helpful summary guide.
This entire R-STAR model really beautifully integrates the theoretical understanding of how expert skills develop with the very practical and pressing needs of training clinicians to effectively navigate these incredibly challenging and sensitive situations involving suicide risk.
It does, and the author concludes by reinforcing the idea that while formal training cannot entirely replace the valuable experience gained over years of clinical practice,
Of course not.
it can significantly enhance how effectively novice clinicians learn and integrate new knowledge as they develop their own expertise in this critical area.
So what's the key takeaway here for you, our listener? Well, even if you're not directly involved in clinical training, the underlying principles we've discussed today, the importance of breaking down complex skills into manageable parts, understanding the difference between knowing what and knowing how, the power of structured training methodologies, and practical memory aids like SIG, ECAP-ES, and TIP-EM.
Yeah, those mnemonics are useful.
And the crucial step of understanding the learner's starting point. These are all incredibly relevant to learning and skill development in any field you might be interested in.
This really raises an important question for you to consider. How might these principles we've explored today, this idea of moving from declarative understanding to procedural mastery, and the impact of structured, cognitively informed training apply to how you approach learning new skills or developing expertise in your own life or professional pursuits?
Yeah, that's a great point.
What aha moments did this deep dive spark for you about the process of learning itself and how we can all become more effective learners and teachers? That's something truly valuable to reflect on.